really resonates, and I think that the role, looking at some of these shifts in social fields, be that a group, be that a larger movement, it's also interesting to see that more often than not, the beginning and the transition and the gateway into these shifts actually happens with individuals who kind of move into that territory first and then who create the space for others. And also, what you explained, I think, is for many of us an everyday experience when we deal with our, for example, so many groups have their own soul, kind of. There's this term of family soul, kind of a certain type of humor you have with your folks, or with certain networks. And I know that in the relationship to a certain network, to a certain group, it triggers certain aspects of being within me, kind of certain way how I am present, and or a certain humor. Mm-hmm. And I think that experience many have. But what I'm most interested in is really how, and just to add another example, in working with organizations, kind of helping them as an action researcher or a consultant, that's a very widely distributed experience, that you can turn yourself into an instrument of helping that type of community to move to a next level. So sometimes it's a larger systems, sometimes it's a single organization, but you can actually tune your own self, your own vehicle, your own mind into an instrument to connect with that larger whole and to figure out next steps. Now, but what I'm most interested in really is what you coming back to your example of kind of the whole seeing itself, and then what could be my role as an individual there. What I would be most interested in is kind of what really are examples where you can see that happen. And I remember that you once shared with me a story of an astronaut that you met and that you asked kind of a similar question. And we started the ULab kind of with the wonderful clip about the overview effect, kind of where some of them shared their experiences. So I wonder whether you might, this story kind of I forgot the name of the astronaut that you met. I think that story has an important key of understanding that deeper relationship that we can between the part and the whole, between the individual and the larger community that we co-create.
Well, I think if we think about this as kind of elaborating and extending what we were talking about a little while ago, that mind or awareness can operate at multiple levels. And it's not like you leave one behind. I don't think a transcendent enlightenment experience makes me less an ego. Mm. Ego's still there, so long as I'm kind of walking around in this little thing here called this body, I'll have this ego with it. It's just that things expand and come back, and they expand and come back. But that expanded part hasn't vanished. And because of that, we can kind of see what we've lost. And we'll just take as an example that, so I've now got really a passionate conviction on some kind of activist cause, and I'm really helping people. Right now, all of us are paying a lot of attention to various social movements around the world. It's very easy when you expand that way that you lose the individual entirely, which is a dangerous thing, because you can then get caught up. The collective fields, I think, are a phenomenon. I don't think they're good or bad. Mm. We all know lots of examples of collective fields that are disastrous. Mm. There's a collective that starts to arise, and then all individual balances, and something's really wrong here, difficult questions disappear. And you have, a mob or a cult or all these phenomena. So I think it may be that to have a healthy collective field, it has to be this phenomenon that's larger and smaller. That the individual is becoming more and more themselves, and the collective is becoming more and more powerful. I certainly think we've seen that for years in teams. To me, again, those experiences of great teams have been kind of like the training ground. And that's obviously just, 10, 20, 50, or 100 people. But every time I've lived through that over extended period of time with people, and ask them later, was that an important experience for you? Did you become more you? They say, oh yeah, we became more a team and I became more me.
Mm.
So you see this enhanced collective, enhanced individual. I think that's the dynamic we're always looking for. And I don't think just a momentary awakening does it. I think when all is said and done, the practice, the commitment to practice is ultimately individual. It's what I do every morning. It's what I do, How do I go about this? So that's what keeps us grounded in a sense, the way that, in almost all the different traditions, the human being is kind of this place between earth and heaven, right? And you see that same idea expressed in most of the world's religions. But it's not the collective, it's the individual. So keeping this really grounded in deeper and fuller development of me, an enriching of my own awareness, I would call it my ethical awareness, but I don't mean that in the sense of a code of ethics, but my continual awareness of the consequences of my actions. And a continual cultivation of my own sense of value, which is the basis of ethical action. I can see what's happening, and I continually asking, well, what is it that I really care about? And an expansion. So it's kind of deepening, maybe the traditional Christian mythology of it really is the cross. It's the deepening of the vertical connection, earth to heaven through me, and the horizontal connection, me to other. So I think the reason those kind of images are so recurrent in human affairs is they're both really important. I think the point we're at right now is that there's more and more kind of social activism against things. That's fine, but we've got to be for things. We can't just, and I think that's starting to shift. I think we had a whole, if you look at the history of the NGO world as an example of how movements crystallize into institutions, right? So the environmental movement crystallized into a whole lot of environmental NGOs, social justice NGOs. Very, very often in that crystallization, they become against something. And when that happens, they can get a lot of power because anger is powerful, fear is powerful, the emotions that are being channeled when you're trying to fight something that's evil or bad or dangerous, or think of all the movements with the word anti in them, right? So they're very clearly against something. That's kind of like opens the door into a territory, but the whole collective phenomenon will get distorted very quickly. And it'll lose the aspirational element. The aspiration has to be continually nurtured in us individually and collectively. So I think the frustration that can animate a movement is understandable, but it can't be about the frustration. The frustration has to be just a way to get us moving because, by golly, something is wrong here. Fine. But what's right? What do you want to create? And I think only that opening, that move from the anti to the pro, from the against something to for something, can also open us to these higher dimensions. Because, the unanswered question, still to me, is what are we really trying to create? What is this really all about? And when we know the world's got all these problems, the social, the ecological, the economic, and we can see all that. And we know that that's not a future path that's going to be very robust, at least not for a large number of people. It might be a very robust path for a smaller and smaller number, but not for, 7 or 9 billion it's not going to be. We know all that. But where's the transcendent aspiration? I had an interesting experience about 3 or 4 months ago. Since I think this is a question that I'm asking now that all of us have lived with in different forms, which is kind of integral to all of our work, whether it's the organizational learning, systems thinking work, or the theory U work. We're always kind of opening ourselves to the vision, opening ourselves to what's trying to emerge. How do we give our life energy to what's trying to emerge? And I think, in a nutshell, we still don't know. And there's parts of it I think are pretty clear because they almost have to be. There has to be some degree of stabilized collective awareness. So there's an entity. I said, you know, this agency that's causing all the agent difficulty has to kind of become more enlightened agency. But in some sense, it may be that that's just also the very beginning, or that's an essential but not a defining element. So we were on about a 2-week trip to Europe. My wife and I, we did a 5-day silent retreat with a group of friends, a collective silent retreat. It was very powerful. Then we were a big global forum in Europe, and then wandering around France with a few friends. And as it turned out, unplanned, as it turned out, the last day of this 10 days, which was a very wonderful, kind of powerful, personal journey, ended up in Chartres. Now, any of us who have ever been there know that this is quite an interesting place, right? It's an incredibly powerful place that's been a sacred site for thousands and thousands of years, upon which we're in a series, as happens, of Gothic cathedrals, in a beautiful place. And so I kind of thought, oh, that's interesting, you know, this incredible 10-day journey ends up here. That's the way it turned out. We're in there, walk in, and I immediately, you know, I always feel this, going into Chartres, you can't not feel just overwhelmed by the profound silence. I mean, it's a really silent place. So it just invites you into this. So I walk over and I kept walking until I found where I wanted to sit down. I sat down, and I think it probably took all of about 5 seconds. All of a sudden, this message comes through. I've had this happen maybe 3 or 4 times in my life, with just this direct communication, and it's been very helpful. Every time that's ever happened, it's been like a new star in my firmament. You know, like that North Star is always there. You know, the clouds can come and go, but you know, the star is actually always there. That's been my experience in those moments. There's only been about maybe 2 previous ones. So the message that came through, and I share this in the spirit of what we were talking about before, the mystery, because this is a mysterious message. The message was, the destination is not the one you think it is. That was it. One sentence. Clear as a bell. Destination is not the one you think it is. So I think that in this upwelling of the collective creative process of awareness, as you know, who knows if it'll happen fast enough to avert the disasters. I mean, disasters are winning right now. We know that. I think there's a stage that we have to get to right away where you might say that the ship, which has been headed this way, has to just stop heading that way. It's going to take a long time to turn this ship. It's not the ship's going to be going 180 days. It's not going to be going in a different direction. Not in less than probably several generations. So we just got to stop it heading in that direction. Start to kind of stabilize it. And in that process, I believe within a decade or 2, we will start to feel that yes, we can bring about the changes needed. But then, we still won't know quite yet what the changes all are. Or, again, what the destination is. If we look to kind of wisdom traditions, I don't think, again, this is a new awakening. You know, people are trying to be healthier, happier, have better community, and stabilize or make some more healthy their social order. But then, at some point, the wisdom traditions say, no, that's not it at all, actually. That was all just necessary to get started and to kind of get you off the destructive path. But then, you know, you have ideas of enlightenment, you have this or that, but there's something that hasn't yet crystallized, I believe. And I'm not sure if it'll happen in 10 years or 50 years. But that's actually what my friend Rusty Schweikart saw. So the astronaut story that I was sharing with you again, it's been years since I've even shared it. So his name was Rusty Schweikart. He was in Apollo 7. Apollo 9 landed on the moon. Apollo 8 was the Apollo that orbited the moon. And those historic pictures of the Earth from space were taken from Apollo 8. Prior to that, the previous mission was to test the lunar lander and the lunar module in orbit. So they had all the stuff built, but they never left orbit. They just orbited, and they were testing it all in orbit. And that was Rusty's mission. And apparently, it went much smoother than usual, so that he said, we had the opportunity. Now a lot of people in the space lab have, but in those days nobody had that opportunity. They would be up orbiting for 3, 4, 5 days, and they're working on an extraordinary demanding checklist. Something doesn't go right, they're behind schedule. He said this was kind of magical. mission because we actually got ahead of schedule. And he said the last 2 or 3 days, I got to do what almost nobody had ever done. Just look out the window for hours at a time. And now we know from people like in that video, most of whom are in this orbiting satellite, the space lab. So they're up there a lot. They get to really what they call Earth gaze. So Rusty was probably one of the first astronauts who ever got to Earth gaze.
Mm.
And he said, for the last 2 or 3 days, I spent most of my time just looking out the window. And I think, he said it took 10 years. He said he didn't tell anybody what happened because I could not figure out how to even do it. And about 10 years later, he was invited to give a talk at a place called Lindisfarne, which is a commune in Long Island. And he said, I thought of a way to do it. I would just ask people to imagine you're sitting in my body. And imagine that I'm not me, and this was literally the way the metaphor opened up. Imagine I'm not me, but I'm the sensory apparatus of humankind. So that, yes, my eyes are seeing, my senses are feeling, but you're feeling through. So he shifted and told his whole story as you. Now you see this. Now you see this. Now you see this. And he developed a way to talk about it. It was somehow making that bridge, that it wasn't him, it was you. Opened him up, and then he became extraordinarily eloquent. And I'll never forget, there's a very famous passage of that speech, which then got printed and shared all over. He gave his Lindisfarne, he said, now you wrote, he said, every 90 minutes you see, the coast of, the western coast of the Americas. Then he said, you're looking for what's familiar to you, right? You live in Houston, so you notice when you go over Texas. And then now you're going over Florida, and you know that place. And he said, that's what you've been doing now for several days. You've been looking for the places that are familiar. He said, but now you notice something has shifted. Now you're looking forward to seeing the Sinai Peninsula. And now you're looking forward to seeing the western coast of India. And you realize slowly that you're looking forward to seeing all these places that you didn't grow up with. You're now realizing your identity has shifted. And you're now identifying with all of it. And he said, now you're in the last day, and you've now shifted that identity, and you've been going over all these places which are now equally appreciated. You feel the same connection. You feel the same love you felt just for the place you knew. And he said, and now you're drifting over what we call the Middle East. And you see that stretch of division between the Mediterranean Sea and the land. And you see the familiar outline of the Dead Sea, and you see the desert, and he said, you're staring down at this. And now you realize that you're seeing it, there are no lines. Every time you've ever seen this before, it's been a map. Every time you've ever seen that familiar geography, there's been lines drawn. Of course, the lines move with history. He said, and you realize in this instant of awakening, there are no lines, and you realize right now people are busy killing each other over those lines, which do not actually exist except in their imagination. So, I heard him actually give that version of that talk. I had read it, and he was at a program we were leading, and he was sharing a little bit of that after dinner. And he finished it, and my partner, Charlie Kiefer, said, so Rusty, he's told this whole story, he said, so Rusty, if you looked at all of that right now, 13, 14 years later, what did you actually see? And I'll never forget, he just paused, and you could see it just open up a whole experience. Because, it's like the North Star. That North Star was always there. He could always go back to that awareness. But now he went back to it after 14 years in the presence of a group of people who had really taken it in. And he paused, and he just sat there with his eyes closed, and he said, I saw a baby about to be born. I don't think any of us know what's coming, but it could be quite wonderful.
it's a story that that takes my words away, because it is embodying a different kind of seeing. And it's a seeing that originates from the heart. And I think what he described in seeing the earth, we also, many of us, often experience in seeing each other in social situations. But it's just that because of the pace, the speed, and the interruptions, we often not notice these moments when they happen. So thank you for sharing this experience that you had with Rusty, that is such a powerful illustration of what we have been talking about in the whole conversation here, which is that, yes, it's my eyes. It's my eyes that are connect to this reality out there, and yet what is operating through me can be so much more. So and when we talk about kind of shifting the inner place from that we operate, it really is a shift from me to we, from just kind of my own small part to a larger whole that to some degree is accessible, and to some other degree is not. And why I think this story matters is that many of us have these experiences many times, but it often goes by unnoticed.